I was 94 years old the day I finally opened a bank statement instead of setting it aside for someone else to handle. And what I found on that piece of paper made my hands shake so badly I had to put it down on the kitchen table before I could read it again. There were withdrawals I never made, transfers to accounts I did not recognize, and a balance that was a fraction of what it should have been after a lifetime of careful saving. For a moment, I told myself it had to be a mistake, a clerical error, something the bank would fix with an apology and a phone call. But the dates on those withdrawals matched visits from people I loved more than anyone else on this earth. And once the thought entered my mind, I could not make it leave. I want to tell you my story slowly, the way it actually happened. Because if I rush through it the way my mind wants to, you might miss the small warning signs that I missed too. I was not a foolish woman. I raised children on my own after I lost my husband young. I managed a household budget through decades when money was tight, and I prided myself on never being the kind of person who could be taken advantage of. That pride is exactly why it took me so long to see what was happening right in front of me, because I could not imagine that the people who called me at every holiday, who brought flowers on my birthday, who sat beside my hospital bed when my hip gave out, would ever look at my life savings as something to be quietly emptied out. It started so gently that I never noticed the shift. One of my children offered to help me with my finances after my eyesight began to fail, saying it was only sensible for someone to keep an eye on the bills so nothing got missed. I was relieved, honestly, because reading fine print had become a strain, and I trusted this person completely. The power of attorney felt like a formality. A piece of paper that existed only in case something terrible happened to me, not a tool that could be used while I was very much alive and sitting 3 rooms away. I signed it gladly, grateful that someone loved me enough to take on the burden. For a long while, nothing seemed wrong. Bills were paid. My house stayed warm. Groceries appeared in my refrigerator. I did not ask to see receipts because asking felt like an accusation, and I did not want to insult the child who was giving up their weekends to help an old woman manage her affairs. Looking back now, I understand that this is precisely the arrangement that predators, even loving ones, count on. Trust does not announce itself as trust. It simply removes the need for anyone to check anything, and once nobody is checking, there is no one left to notice. The small changes came first. A grocery bill that seemed a little high. A gift I did not remember approving for a grandchild's birthday. Paid for out of an account that was supposed to be mine alone. A subscription I never signed up for, quietly deducted month after month without a single word to me about it. I mentioned it once, gently, and was told not to worry, that everything was being handled, that I should focus on my health and let the family take care of the rest. I believed that. I wanted to believe that. When you are 94 and your body no longer does what it used to do, there is a temptation to hand over control simply because it is easier, and easier can feel, in the moment, like love. Age has a way of making a person doubt her own judgment long before her judgment has actually failed her, and I have come to believe that quiet doubt was used against me more than once, whether anyone meant it that way or not. It was a neighbor, not a bank teller, and not a lawyer, who first said the word out loud to me. She had been widowed herself and had gone through something similar with a nephew, and she recognized the pattern before I did. The way someone who has survived a storm can smell the weather changing long before the rest of us notice the clouds. She asked me plainly whether I had seen my own bank statements in the last year. I had not. She asked if I knew exactly how much money I had left. I did not. She did not accuse anyone. She simply suggested kindly that I request copies of everything directly from the bank myself, in person, without telling anyone in advance that I was doing it. I remember sitting in that bank lobby with my cane between my knees, waiting for a young man to print out 12 months of transactions, feeling like a criminal for wanting to know about my own money. My hands were unsteady as he slid the papers across the counter, and I remember thanking him quietly as though I had asked for something improper rather than something that was entirely mine by right. When he handed me the papers, my first instinct was still to defend my family in my own head before I had even read a single line. Surely there was an explanation. Surely I was misunderstanding something. That instinct to protect the people who were hurting me turned out to be one of the most dangerous things about the entire situation, more dangerous in some ways than the theft itself, because it kept me silent for months longer than I needed to be. And every silent month was another month the pattern was allowed to continue undisturbed. The numbers on those pages told a story I did not want to hear. Transfers to a personal account that was not mine. Cash withdrawals on days I had not left the house. Charges at stores I had never once set foot inside in my entire life. A pattern emerged that was too consistent, too deliberate, to be a series of innocent mistakes. Someone had been treating my account not as something to protect, but as something to draw from a little at a time, in amounts small enough that I might never think to add them up, or might be too embarrassed to ask. I did not confront anyone that day. I sat with it. I cried in a way I had not cried since I buried my husband, not loudly, but in that quiet, exhausted way that comes when your whole understanding of a relationship shifts underneath you. I kept asking myself what I had done wrong, whether I had raised someone capable of this on purpose or by accident, whether there had been a moment years ago when I could have taught a different lesson and none of this would have happened. I want to say clearly to anyone listening who is going through something similar, that this guilt does not belong to the victim. It belongs entirely to the person who chose to take. When I finally did speak up, gently and without accusation, the response was not honesty. It was a story about a loan that was always going to be paid back, about an emergency that had come up suddenly, about how everything I had seen was temporary and would be corrected soon. I wanted so badly to accept that explanation that I nearly did. It would have been easier. It would have let me keep the version of my family that existed in my head instead of the one sitting across the table from me, avoiding my eyes. It was the second time I found new withdrawals after being told everything was fixed, that something in me finally hardened into resolve. I understood then that this was not a mistake being corrected. It was a habit being managed carefully around my awareness rather than in spite of it. That was the moment I stopped protecting the relationship and started protecting myself. Because at 94 years old, I did not have decades left to rebuild what was being taken from me. And I refused to spend whatever years I had left being quietly hollowed out by people who smiled at me while doing it. I want to be honest about how frightening it is to take action against your own family. It is not like reporting a stranger. There is no clean anger to hold on to, only grief tangled up with love, tangled up with fury, all arriving at once and refusing to separate themselves into anything simple. I contacted an elder law attorney, someone who specialized in exactly this kind of situation, and I remember feeling ashamed even making that phone call, as though needing legal protection for my own children was a confession of some failure on my part rather than theirs. The attorney was kind but direct. She had heard this story more times than I could imagine, and she told me plainly that financial exploitation of older adults is disturbingly common, far more common than most families like to admit, and that it is committed overwhelmingly by people the victim already knows and trusts, family members most of all, precisely because trust is what removes suspicion in the first place. She explained that a power of attorney can be revoked at any time by the person who granted it, so long as that person still has the capacity to make decisions for themselves, that accounts can be secured with new safeguards, and that there are legal protections available at both the state and local level for exactly this kind of situation. But she was careful to remind me that none of those protections activate on their own. They require the person being harmed to be willing to act, and acting requires admitting out loud, sometimes for the first time, that someone you love has hurt you on purpose rather than by accident. Revoking that power of attorney was one of the hardest things I have ever done, harder in its own way than burying my husband, because grief for the dead does not come with betrayal folded inside it. I sat in that attorney's office signing papers that would formally, legally, remove trust one had freely given, and I felt like I was ending something that could never be repaired, because I understood that once this was out in the open, there was no pretending our family was what I had believed it to be. The confrontation that followed was not the relief I had hoped for. There were tears, but they were not the kind that come from remorse. There was anger directed at me for going to a lawyer instead of trusting the family to work it out privately, as though my seeking protection was the betrayal rather than the years of quiet theft that came before it. I have learned since then that this reaction is common too, that people who exploit trust often respond to being caught not with guilt, but with the accusation that you have wronged them by noticing. I do not know if that relationship will ever fully heal, and I have made peace slowly and imperfectly, with the possibility that it may not. What I do know is that my remaining money is now protected, that I review my own statements every single month without apology, that I have a trusted third party, someone with no access to my funds, who I share those statements with as an extra set of eyes. I know now that independence in old age is not about refusing all help. It is about making sure the help you accept comes with accountability attached to it, not blind faith alone. If there is one thing I hope someone watching this takes away from my story, it is this. Love and honesty are not the same thing, and a warm smile is not proof of good intentions. If you are older and someone close to you has taken over your finances, ask to see your own statements regularly, keep them yourself, and never let embarrassment stop you from checking. If you have an aging parent or grandparent, encourage them to keep their own records even if you are helping, because oversight protects everyone, including the people you trust the most. Financial abuse thrives in silence, and in the assumption that questioning family means doubting love, when in truth, the healthiest families are the ones where questions are welcome. I am 94 years old, and I have lived through a war, the loss of a husband, and more hardship than I ever expected to survive. But nothing prepared me for the particular ache of being deceived by someone I helped raise with my own two hands. I share this story not for sympathy, but because I believe someone out there right now is sitting on a bank statement they are afraid to open, telling themselves it must be a misunderstanding. It might not be. Please look. Please ask questions. Please protect yourself the way I wish I had protected myself years sooner, before the damage had time to grow into something so much harder to undo. For anyone listening who wants practical steps rather than just my story, here is what I would tell you plainly. Review your own bank and credit statements every single month in your own hands, even if someone else helps you manage the rest of your finances. Keep a trusted third party in the loop, ideally someone with no financial access of their own, simply to look over things with you twice a year. Be cautious about signing broad power of attorney documents without first speaking to an independent elder law attorney who works for you alone. And never let embarrassment or the fear of upsetting a relationship stop you from asking direct questions about where your money is going. A family that truly loves you will welcome those questions rather than resent them. If this story meant something to you, consider subscribing to this channel for more true stories like mine. And please take care of yourselves and the people you love, with open eyes as well as open hearts. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. And I truly hope you and your loved ones stay safe, informed, and protected in the years ahead.